Okay, so I'm 14 and I'm most often mistaken for an 18-year-old because of my shape. For a little context, I was at the YMCA with my sister. We were swimming for a while and then I started to feel sick. My younger sister said, "You don't look good. Maybe you should go sit in the changing room for a while." "Yeah, I think I will." I went to the changing room for some peace and quiet, and luckily for me, no one was in there. I sat on one of the benches and closed my eyes. A few moments later, I could hear someone come in. It was a guy, tall, muscular, and generally good looking. I brushed it off thinking he was probably waiting for his girlfriend and came in to check because she was taking too long or something. That was until he approached me and sat right next to me, so close that our thighs were touching. I was really surprised and scooted over and gave him that "what do you think you're doing" look. He smiled at me and said, "Don't worry, girl, I'm not gonna hurt you," and proceeded to put his hand on my back. I stood up and backed away. I was too scared to run because he seemed athletic, so he probably would have caught me. He asked me, "How old are you, baby?" in a sickening sweet tone. I say 14, and he nonchalantly says, "Cool." So I asked how old he was. 23. He stood up and started walking over to me, and I backed up away from him. This is the turning point. I hear a bathroom stall open, and there standing in all her glory was a lady who I call my hero. She stepped out, and I knew she heard everything. The dude hightailed it out of there. The lady was nice and stayed with me for a while. Her name was Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. Back in 2018, I had a bad fever. The kind of fever that will make you wake up in the middle of the night, freezing your ass off, and the next thing you're sweating. Anyways, fast forward. My room is closest to the front door. It was 3 a.m. and I was still awake because I couldn't sleep. All of a sudden I hear someone semi-aggressively trying to open the front door. I live with my parents, so I thought it was my brother coming home, so I called out his name. The doorknob continued turning, and I hid in my bed, terrified. A few minutes later, I told my dad, and he could see the door had been mangled with. That day he installed cameras, and no lie, about a month later we caught a man on camera trying to open the basement door this time. I really regret not looking out my window to try to spot the man, but I was terrified. It also freaks me out that if that night someone had left the door unlocked, a stranger would have been lurking in my house, with my door being the first one. So a little background here. My father was in the Army for 21 years. He retired and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though he didn't need the money, between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place back in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember that date well because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit. My dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road, both at day and night. I was sitting at my usual spot at the table that was set up alongside the window, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table, along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evenings like that, reading books, getting up to run the register, or stock the coolers at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up to our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. This in itself was really strange because of where we were located. You didn't see much people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she had broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. she came inside the store, looked around for a few minutes. I remember getting a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next town up north. My dad let her know that he was working and there was no way he could take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and suddenly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns her back to my dad and points at me, asking if I could take her. My dad responded back that I only had my learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally I would have done it, even though it was illegal, but I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with customers. For whatever reason, he was dismissive of her. Turns out, he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he saw her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door so hard that it opened back up, and I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she slammed it. Then she just stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back to the interstate and then starts up the northbound ramp. Almost a year passes and I'm in my bedroom. Less than a week before my 16th birthday, I hear my dad yelling from his room. "Son, get your ass in here. Look at this." I quickly run to the living room to see my dad pointing at the TV. On the TV was a mugshot of the lady, and I immediately remembered her as the lady from the store. Turns out I almost gave a ride to Eileen Warnos, the real lady from Monster, the movie. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like it had the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel so isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my house feel even more quaint on the dark nights. I got home from work one day in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so I'm pulling up into my house. I saw only what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of the car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. This is weird because I had never smelled cigarettes around my house before. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I just ignored it and went inside. I had just come off a shift with a few hours of overtime, so I felt pretty tired. Even though it wasn't even 7 yet, I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, sure that I had heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I had even given him a spare key so that he could stop by even when I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from the phone screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before the phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9-something, but I couldn't tell if I had an unread text or not. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There was a couple of seconds of silence before I heard a loud foot fall as someone started to run through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran into the closet. They were already upstairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in and a spare, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway past my door into the bathroom. Thank God he did. That gave me enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started lifting myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room, and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back into the hallway and into another room, which just had some boxes in the corner, some weights, and a table where I painted miniature models. I guess they decided if someone was hiding, it would be the bedroom, because they charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, I hear the closet door ripped open. I was just crouching in the attic, just a foot away or so from the access, so that I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, all I could see was from about their knee down. They were wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from the room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and the clattering of items as things were thrown around and my furniture was knocked over. I stayed crouched in the attic. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet. I wasn't certain if I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting slowly. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped over my bed. I assume an attempt to find me. That was a loud noise I heard as he stepped away from the closet before he screamed. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I had expected that. Chairs had been knocked over, the sofa was flipped, all books and pictures and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. All the cupboards in the kitchen had been opened, and the boxes of canned foods had been thrown on the ground. As far as I could tell though, the only thing I was missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along the fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube, which the police said people often use to smoke meth. So they think that he was watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected the evidence and told me that I should stay with my family or friends for the night and get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved the shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning up things. I would often go to the window with a flashlight to shine along the fence line where the police found the cigarette butts and foil, but I never saw anything. The next day I called to have the door fixed and motion lights installed at the back and the side of my house. I ran a phone cable up to the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to get stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else ever happened in the house though. I lived there another 3 years without incident. One more precaution I took was practicing getting out of bed and going to the closet and climbing into the attic as quickly as possible. I even kept at it when I moved, except now I go into a crawl space. I try not to think about what would have happened if I was a bit slower to getting into the attic, or if he hadn't gone to the bathroom at the end of the hall first. I was watching my daughter's kids while she and her husband went out of town. They have a teenage daughter. Let's name her Alyssa. At like 3 a.m. I'm waking up by a weird rustling sound and look out my window to see some movement. I saw a boy emerge from the bushes on the side of the house. I saw a bike tossed on the lawn that definitely wasn't ours. My first thought was it was a burglar casing the house. But since he looked young and came through on a bike, I figured scaring him straight would be enough for him to decide to head home. I didn't want to ruin a teenager's life by calling the cops straight away. I went on the porch, flipping the lights on. "Can I help you?" The guy looked surprised, but not nervous. He was wearing a Letterman-style jacket but once I got a clear view of him from the streetlight, he seemed much older than my granddaughter, looked gruff and more wiry than athletic. He walked up closer to the house and said, "Yeah, I'm looking for Alyssa." I gave him a disapproving glare, hoping that he'd realized he'd come looking for a girl late at night, and a grumpy old person answered that it would be time to split. I'm thinking what must have happened is, Alyssa knew her parents were going to go out of town, and maybe before she knew I'd be staying over, she told her secret older boyfriend to come over. It was late, and I was alone with several kids, so I didn't want him coming any closer to the house. I also thought it was weird that he came so late and wanted to be sure Alyssa actually wanted to talk to him. So I said, "I'm sorry, who?" And he said, "Alyssa. You know, Alyssa Johnson. This is her house." I thought he knew her full name. They must at least be friends. I said, "You wait here." He started walking up, and I felt a sick burning in my gut. Instinct kicked in. I yelled, "No, stop, freeze," then readjusted and said, "You stay right there. This is private property. Don't take a step closer. Wait there." So I go in, and Alyssa is asleep, just one room over from where the rustling first occurred, and I wake her up and say something to the effect of, "I don't know whose big idea it was to have friends over at this time, but you gotta tell them to go home." She had no clue what I was talking about. I told her, "There's a guy outside asking for you." Confused, she gets up and goes to the window. She sees him and goes white as a sheet. "He asked for me?" "Yeah." "By name?" "Yes." "Call the police. I've never seen him in my life." I called 911 immediately. But as I was on the phone with them, Alyssa started tugging on my arm. "He's coming up." I had younger kids in the house to think about, so I kept the door latched and pulled it open just enough so I could yell. I asked my husband, "And nobody knows Alyssa Johnson. Leave my property or I'm calling 911. He got angry and started yelling for her to come out. Thankfully, the police came pretty quickly, and while he heard sirens, he grabbed his bike and rode off. I watched where he was going, and he jumped into the passenger side of a car without headlights on or front plates and sped off. The police followed in the same direction once I told them, but they didn't get him. They advised us to take all of her social media details offline if she was sure she didn't know the person, and said that there was a couple similar reports recently and they were looking into it. I got a heavy lock on my door, and she slept in my room for the remainder of my visit. So this is one of my experiences from working as an overnight security guard at my local port. This did not happen to me firsthand. It happened to one of my coworkers. But since that incident happened during my shift, I would fear to even go into the restroom alone. So just a recap on setting. The local port has a radius of nearly 2 miles, and there are 3 overnight security guards on the shift, including me. We're all at the front gate post, and it's about the size of a trailer home. The front gate post is separated from everything else in the site. Buildings, slabs, offices, the oil rigs, everything. It's the entry point to the entire industrial park. The offices and restrooms are about walking distance from our post. And it's really dark since there wasn't any lights around. Around 2 a.m., the lieutenant walks out of the post to go use the restroom. The restrooms are deep in the center of the offices, and the offices carry a very creepy vibe because they were constructed around the 1950s. About 7 minutes later, me and Mike look out the post window to find our lieutenant sprinting back to our post. At first we thought it was hilarious since he's a chubby dude, so we found it funny to watch him run. Then the realization started kicking in. The lieutenant was the only one who let out the fact that the site was haunted. He said he had seen things, and that it didn't really startle him much anymore. We slowly began to imagine and wondering what the fuck he had seen or heard to scare the shit out of him like this. I mean, it must have been bad enough for him to be running back in a very hysterical manner. The lieutenant opens the door to the post that me and Mike are in. We are both speechless and just staring at him as he catches his breath. After catching his breath, he tells us, "This is the last time I will ever use those restrooms in the office building. I was taking a shit in the third stall, and then I heard the restroom door swivel open. I thought it was one of you, so I simply ignored it. But the thing is, I didn't hear any footsteps. I was listening to music, but I paused it to see if I could hear anything. A few seconds went by, and nothing. And then I heard the water faucet go off by itself, and then, a few seconds later, the air dryer went off as well. I finished my business, and I ran back as fast as I could because I knew it wasn't either you in there." Creepiest part about this is that both the water faucet and hairdryer both were motion activated, so in order for them to go off, something had to trigger it. Before this incident, I was already skeptical about using the restroom alone. I hated taking shits at work during the night shift because I was always anticipating for something creepy like this to happen to me. The worst part is when you're taking a shit, you're in a vulnerable position. Also, those restrooms are way too deep in the building, and it's pitch black inside. You need a flashlight to go inside, and it's very quiet and creepy. This is another event that happened, and it's probably the creepiest one. The veteran guards that had been there for years would often say that their site was very haunted, given the fact that there had been accidents and deaths that occurred there a long time ago. I was aware that people died due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm a religious person, but I just always thought the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 or 6 nights a week, and for the first few weeks, I never really saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks, and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrols. Nothing too crazy. Just to describe the settings to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions, when there are big projects being constructed at the port, the workers sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where the port workers were required to stay there for a few days, there was a gym in the site for their convenience. The gym was fairly old. It had a sauna, weights, a racquetball court. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning back to the front gate. On one of those nights, Mike and I decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball on the cage. It's around 2 a.m. The entire building is so quiet that you could hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner is cut off, and so is everything else. The only thing running are the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we hear a loud thump. We brush it off as nothing and continue our workout. Then after a few minutes, we heard a loud thump once more. At first we thought it was just our lieutenant, which could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was the front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumping sounds on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought that it was an air conditioning unit, but then remembered it was off. And even when it switched on during the day, there has never been a report of thumping coming from the air conditioning unit. After a few minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute shit out of me till this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym, where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlights and aimed it towards the clear glass door. And I got chills all over my body, and started to tear up, so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that means that the loud thumps were the ball mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if someone or something was playing in the cage. We were both confused and frightened to how this could be really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were scared shitless and started yelling and running, because we knew that there was probably something evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked us why we were crying and running in a ridiculous manner. We told him what we had witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. He then said, "That's why guards quit so often. There's something evil in the area, and this is not the first time something bad like this has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas, and lights mysteriously switching on and off. Till this day, I still get chills recounting my experiences with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was just a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long at that job after that. This is a very true story. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and in my hometown there's a lot of houses from the 1800s, but mainly they are new houses. I just happened to get a babysitting gig with another girl because their kids were very hard to take care of. Now, I wasn't very familiar with babysitting, seeing that I've only taken care of my cousins from time to time. Anyways, I went to the house after picking up the girl who was helping me with the kids. Let's just say this house looked like a murder house from the 1800s, but I shook off the feeling and went in to meet the parents. Also, the girl and I were working from 4 to 11 p.m., and Halloween was next week, so this makes it even more crazy. The kids and I got along great. I kept their names straight, unlike the other girl. She did nothing but play on her phone. She didn't help with the kids. Things were fine until about 9:30 p.m. I put down one of the kids, and the girl put down the other one. We had one kid left, and he was old enough to get into his bed on his own. Once all of them were in bed, some shit happened, and we still can't explain how these things happened. The first thing that happened was on the intercom that was in the parents' office and basement. Static and moans came out from it, and in the basement we heard footsteps running up and down and moving of plastic bags. I heard a grown man's laugh where the kids were and bolted the stairs as fast as I could as my motherly instinct to protect them. When I got up there, they were fine, and they had a guard dog to protect them, but you never know what could happen. Things just got weirder. Those things kept happening, and the girl I was with hid in the bathroom and was no help. So I grabbed the other dog, since I wasn't downstairs a lot due to my runs to make sure the kids were okay. Big mistake. That dog was evil. It bit me and the girl. The kids as well, which is why she was left outside in the first place. But I had to do something to protect this girl, even if I disliked her. I still didn't want her to die. The parents came home at 11, and we told them everything. And well, the dad went into the basement and saw the intercom was turned on, and the girl's food bag, which I saw her throw away, was down there, which was freaking creepy as hell. I wasn't too scared because somehow I've always been kind of fearless, but I'm still trying to figure out how those things happened. I'm looking in to see if there was someone murdered in that house. We have a lot of haunted places where I live, and I decided to post my story of paranormal activities, which I don't believe, but it was just too weird to be a human.
This was a strange encounter. It was very scary at the time, but when I tell people this story, they usually don't think it's something to freak out about. Last Thanksgiving, I was driving home from college with my friend, both 21-year-old females at the time. I live in a very isolated part of Arkansas that requires driving through an hour of hairpin turns in the mountains. There are a lot of blind turns, and the whole time you're driving on the edge of a huge drop-off with no barriers. I'm usually pretty confident driving through the mountains, but we were in my friend's car, so I was going slower than usual, driving about 5 over the speed limit. Almost as soon as we started the roughest part of the drive, another car was tailgating us pretty close. This was stressing me out, and as soon as I saw somewhere I could pull over, I did. I pulled into a church parking lot, and my friend offered to drive the rest of the way, but I declined as it was completely dark and she had never driven this route before. We get back on our way, and a few minutes later I have to come to a screeching halt as there's a car stopped in the middle of the road. It wasn't on the shoulder at all, just stopped dead in the middle of the road. My friend is saying that they must have broken down, but can't call a tow because there's no service in this area. I immediately have a bad feeling and lock the doors. I tell my friend to stay in the car no matter what. She is starting to get scared at this point and points out that she thinks it was the car that was following us. I can't tell, but I'm very scared at this point as well. It's parked right before a hairpin turn, so I can't pass it. My friend starts frantically telling me to go ahead and pass it, but I don't want to get hit by a Mack truck or fall off the mountain. I honk my horn. Nothing happens. No chance of calling for help as there is no cell service. We wait there for a while doing nothing. My friend is crying and freaking out, but I'm so scared to try to pass them. I honk a couple of times and eventually a guy gets out of the car, comes around back and leans against his car just staring at us. My friend is freaking out even more, and I'm just frozen. I tell her not to make eye contact. I'm ready to floor it if he does something, but he just stands there staring. He's not checking his car or anything. I try to stay calm and pray that another car will come along soon. This goes on for what seems like forever, but was probably 15 minutes. He's just casually leaning against his car looking at us. Eventually, we see car lights in our rear view, and then the guy jogs to his door and gets back in his car. He speeds off, going dangerously fast, so there was nothing wrong with his car. I start driving, not wanting to cause a wreck. We don't see anything else for a while, but we pass the same car parked along the highway a while later, and it pulls back on and starts tailing us again. I try to speed up and get rid of him, but he keeps following. We have cell service at this point, but I don't know if we should call the cops because nothing really happened. I call home and tell my brothers what was going on and tell them to wait on the porch for us. The car follows me all the way home down the really long drive to my house. I get to my house and my two brothers are waiting on the porch holding their deer rifles. I pull in and the car just goes to the end of the drive, loops around and speeds off back the way it came. We tried to see its license plates, but we couldn't make them out. Me and my friend were really freaked out, but when I told other friends the whole story, they didn't think it was a big deal.
It's official. I'm an old man. For the last couple of years I've comforted myself by saying I'm in my early 70s, but math is simple and unforgiving. Today is my 75th birthday, and God, the years do fly. I'm not here for your well wishes. This is hardly a milestone I'm excited about. I'm glad to still be here, of course, but I find I have less and less to live for with every passing year. My bones ache, my kids live far away, and the other side of my bed has been empty for just over 8 months now. In fact, once I cast my vote against the goddamn Trump this November, I may have nothing to live for at all. So spare me your happy birthdays and your congratulations, if you please. I'm here because I have a story for you, and it's one I've never told before. I used to think I kept it inside because it was silly, or maybe because nobody would believe it. I found though that the older you grow, the more exhausting it becomes to lie to yourself. If I'm being perfectly honest, I've never told anybody this story because it scares me, almost to death. But death seems friendlier than it used to, so listen close. The year was 1950, the setting a small town in Maine. I was a boy of 9, rather small for my age, with only one friend in the world to speak of, and his family, seemingly on a whim, decided to move 2,000 miles away. It was shaping up to be the worst summer of my life. My pop wasn't around and my mum was a chore whore. Boy, was I proud of myself when I came up with that one. So it wasn't appropriate to hang around the house. With some hesitation, I decided the public library was the place to be that summer. The library's collection of books, particularly children's books, was meagre to say the least. But within the walls of that miserly structure, I found no undone chores, no nagging mother, God rest her soul, and perhaps most importantly, no other children with whom I would be expected to associate. I was the only kid with a low enough social status to spend the previous days of freedom sulking amid the bookshelves, and that was just fine with me. The first half of my summer was even more dreadful than I had imagined it would be. I would sleep until 10, do my chores, and then ride my bike to the library. And by bike I mean rusty log of shit attached to a pair of wheels. Once there, I would split my time between unintentionally annoying the elderly patrons and deliberately doing so. One pleasant lady actually interrupted my incessant tongue clicking to hiss a shut the fuck up at me. The first time I ever heard a grown up use the F word. Big fucking deal, I know, but in those days it was unheard of. The dreary days turned to woeful weeks. I had actually begun praying for school to start again, until I discovered the basement. I could have sworn I'd roamed every inch of that library, but one day, in the far corner behind the foreign language collection, I stumbled across a small wooden door I had never seen before. That's where it all began. The door was windowless and made from oak and looked far older than the wall at which it rested. It had a knob of black metal that quite literally looked ancient. I wouldn't have been surprised to learn it was crafted in the 17th century. Engraved on the knob was what appeared to be a single footprint. It had the sense that whatever lay beyond this door was forbidden to me, and therefore probably the most interesting thing I would encounter all summer. I quickly glanced around to make sure nobody was watching me, then turned the heavy knob, slipped behind the door and shut it. There was nothing, only darkness. I took a couple of steps and then stopped, unnerved by the totality of the shadow which surrounded me. I waved my hands in front of me in an attempt to find a wall or a shelf or anything to hold on to. What I actually found was a far more subtle and small string, dangling from above, but far more useful. I grabbed it firmly and pulled it down. Back in the day, lots of light bulbs were operated with strings, and this was one of them. My surroundings were instantly illuminated. I was standing on a small, dusty platform that looked as though it hadn't seen life in quite some time. To my left was a crickety-ass spiral staircase, made of wood and appearing ready to collapse at any second. The bulb was the only source of light in the room, and it was feeble, so when I peered over the railing to see what lay below, the bottom of the staircase dissolved into the darkness. I was beginning to feel scared. This place, wherever I was, seemed to have no business in a town library. It was as though I were in a completely different building. But no 9-year-old likes to let a mystery go unsolved. Looking back, I wish I could tell my prepubescent self to turn around, go back, and do anything else besides descending that staircase. You'll be spared a lot of sleepless nights, I'd say. But of course, I didn't know that then, and I may not have listened even if I had. So instead of turning back, I took a deep breath, gripped the railing, and glared resolutely forward as I began my descent. The wood on the railing was dry and covered with splinters. I immediately let go, holding my hands out for balance as I carefully traversed the staircase. It was, or at least seemed, very long, and with only dim glow from the string bulb far above me, my heart pounded mercilessly in the darkness. Even kids can sense when something isn't right. I think they just don't always give a shit. By the time my feet reached the cement floor at the bottom, the light from the bulb above was very nearly a memory. But there was a new light source, and God, I'll never forget it. Directly in front of me was a door, massive and a deep shade of red. The light was coming from behind the door, and it shone out in the lines from all four sides, a sinister, dimly glowing rectangle. For the second time I took a deep breath and went through a door I shouldn't have. In contrast to the dark room I entered from, the room behind the door was blinding. When my eyes adjusted, what I saw nearly took my breath away. It was a library. The most perfect library imaginable. I gaped in wonder as I stepped almost reverently further into the room. It was beautiful. It was smaller than the library above, much smaller, but it seemed to be almost tailor-made for me. The shelves were packed with brightly coloured titles. Both armchairs in the middle of the room were exquisitely comfortable, and the smell, my God, this smell, was simply unbelievable. Sort of a mixture of citrus and pine. I simply can't do it justice with words, so I'll suffice it to say that I've never smelled anything better, not in my 75 years. What was this room? Why had I never heard of it before? Why was nobody else here? Those were the questions I should have been asking, but I was intoxicated. As I gazed around at all the books and basked in the smell of paradise, I could only form one thought. I will never be bored again. In truth, boredom only hid from me for 3 years. It was on my 12th birthday, 63 years ago to this day, that everything changed. Before that day, I visited my basement sanctuary as often as I could, usually several times a week. I never saw another soul down there, yet strangely remained free of suspicion. I never removed a book from that room, but instead would pick up a particular volume wherever I had stopped reading during my previous visit. I sat always in the same deep purple armchair, and always leaving its twin baron and directly across from myself. The armchair was mine. The other was, well, I suppose I couldn't have articulated it then, but better than I can now. But it wasn't mine, that's for damn sure. On my 12th birthday, I arrived later than usual. My mum had invited a couple of classmates and some cousins over to our house to celebrate, a gesture which I found more tedious than touching. Really, I just wanted to spend my birthday sitting and reading and smelling paradise. Eventually our guests went home, and I made it to the library about 15 minutes before closing time. That didn't matter. The workers never checked down there before they locked up. I was free to stay as late as I wished. This particular night, I was devouring the final chapters of an epic adventure, knights, swords, dragons, and the like. I didn't smell it until I reached the final words and closed the book. The once exquisite aroma of that room had turned sour. I sat for a moment, unsettled. Objectively, I could recognise that the smell was actually the same as it had been before, that mixture of citrus and pine. I just perceived it differently, and I didn't like it anymore. It was a nasal version of an optical illusion, you know, the one that looks like a young woman glancing backwards, but all of a sudden you see that it's just really an old woman facing towards you. You can't unsee that, and I couldn't unsmell this. The smell was broken. The odour also seemed for the first time to be coming from somewhere specific. With a fair amount of trepidation, I stalked around the room, sniffing the air like a crazed canine until I came to a shelf near the back. The shelf was perfectly normal, with the exception of one title. A large leather-bound cover of solid-faced maroon, with one striping black footprint at the top of the spine. This was the source of the smell, and saw one sentence scrawled neatly in blood-red ink atop the first page. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. I stared at this sentence, mesmerised, as I began to retreat to my chair. I turned a page, blank. The smell became stronger. Another page, blank, and the smell grew stronger still. I stopped for a moment, suppressed a gag, and continued walking. Then, as I neared the armchairs, I turned one final page, and there, in the same sinister print, was the last thing I expected to see, my own name. I dropped the book, I began to sprint towards the door, but as I shifted my gaze forward, my heart leapt to my throat, and I stopped in my tracks. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore. An aged man in a suit sat before me, one leg crossed over the other, contemplating me with piercing grey eyes and a light smirk. This was all too much. I fell to my knees and expelled the contents of my stomach onto the carpet. I wiped my mouth, staring at my vomit, when I heard the man let out a chuckle. I stared at him, disbelievingly. "Who are you?" I asked, panic in my voice. The man leapt to his feet, grabbed me gently by the shoulders, and helped me to the chair. He sat once again in his own. "I fear we got off to a bad start," he said, glancing to the pile of sick on the carpet. "The smell. It does take some getting used to." "Who are you?" I repeated. "Tonight, you will know the hardship like you've never known before," he said. "I come as a friend, offering you refuge from it, and from all the other storms which lie ahead." I wanted nothing more than to leave at that moment, but I remained seated. I asked him what he was talking about. "Your mother is dead, my boy, by her own hand in her kitchen. The scene is gruesome, I must admit," he said in sorrowful tones. But was there a playful glint in his eye? "Surely you wish to avoid this path. I can show you a safer one." My blood ran cold at the horrors this man spoke of, but I did not believe him. "What do you want with me?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. He laughed, an old raspy yelp that seemed to shake him to his bones. Nothing but your friendship, dear boy, he said. Then, sensing I found his answer inadequate, he expanded. I want you to come on a journey with me. My work is noble, and you will make a fine apprentice. And maybe when I'm done, he sighed tiredly, running his bony finger through his thin white hair. Maybe then, my work can be yours. I stood up, shuffling towards the door, but never breaking his gaze. You're crazy, I told him. My mum isn't dead, she's not. See for yourself if you must, he said, gesturing towards the door. I threw him a contemptuous glare and bolted for the exit. As my hand closed around the knob, he said my name softly. In spite of myself, I turned around. Your road won't be easy, friend. If it ever becomes too much for you, and I mean ever, he said, pausing to sweep his hand over the room, you know where to find me. I slammed the door behind me and took the decrepit stairs 2 at a time. I exited the library, clambered onto my bike, and hightailed it home. The front door was wide open. I dismounted, leaving my bike in a heap on the ground, and approached the house cautiously. The old man was lying. He must have been. Still, tears began to sting my eyes. Heart pounding, I stepped inside and called for my mother. I heard no answer, so I turned into the kitchen. To this day, I don't know why she did it. I have lived in a small town in Maine my entire life. Although I've kept mostly clear of the public library, once in my late 20s, I summoned the courage to step inside. Life was good at that time, and my fear had begun to morph into idle curiosity. Where the door to my basement sanctuary once stood was only a blank wall. I asked the librarian what had become of the basement, though in my heart I knew the answer. There was no basement, she said. There had never been a basement. In fact, if she had her facts correct, city zoning ordinances prohibited a basement in that area. I've been haunted by that sticky sweet smell, the poisonous blend of citrus and pine, and ever since that long ago birthday. When I saw my mother in the kitchen that day, collapsed in a pool of her own blood, I smelled it. When a man claiming to be my father knocked on my college apartment door, begged me for money and beat me within an inch of my life when I refused, I smelled it. When my wife miscarried her second child, I smelled it. And again when she miscarried her fourth. When our oldest son got behind the wheel of the family book, completely shit-faced and got his girlfriend killed, I smelled it. I began to smell it periodically as my wife became sick. She died late last year, and now I'm alone for the first time in more than half a century. Now I smell it every day, and it feels like an invitation. A few months ago, I went back to the library, and the small oak door with the ancient handle was there, right where it used to be. My evening walk has brought me past that library every day since, but I haven't gone inside. Maybe tonight I will. I'm frightened to die, yes, but lately I'm even more frightened to keep living. The old man was right. My road hasn't been easy, and I doubt it will get any easier. Rest your sorrows down, friend, and leave them where they lie. He promised relief, a refuge, he said. Was he right about that too? There's only one way to find out. After all, I still know where to find him.
In the fall of 2010, I decided to go back to college. I was a single mom of 3 boys, but they were all in school now, and me going back was finally possible. The school I went to is a regional campus to a very large university, and located in a neighborhood that is known for crime, meth, heroin, prostitution, etc. But it was only a 20-minute drive from my home, and I didn't feel unsafe about going there. The first day in first class were intimidating. I didn't know anyone and was a lot older than most students. I was 28 at the time. I sat down in the back of the room at a table, and a few minutes later, a lady, who was around my age, sat down next to me. She was very skinny, smelled like cigarettes, greasy hair, sunken eyes. But she started to talk to me and seemed normal enough. She started off the conversation telling me that she chose to sit next to me because I was wearing the prettiest blouse in the room. Strange, but as an awkward person, I leave a lot of leeway for people to say or do awkward things before I think too deep into things. She didn't have a backpack, any books, a pen, notebook, nothing. She said her financial aid hadn't come through yet, but she didn't want to fall behind on classes and asked if she could share my book. I agreed and gave her a pen and paper also. After the first class, she asked if I would mind going to the library with her so she can scan some of the pages to take home. I agreed and we started to head to the library. She stops and looks at her phone and says her son just texted and needs her to come home to do something. She asks if I'll come with her. I tell her I have another class shortly and can't go with her. I ask if she still wants to go to the library first. She says no, that she has to get to her son, but really can't go alone. I kept telling her I cannot go with her and she starts crying. At this point, we were in a common area outside and the parking lot was to one side and the library the other. I tell her I need to go to the library and she's welcome to come, talk, whatever she needs, but I have to go. I didn't like being outside away from people with this woman anymore and was trying to get back to a busier area. She gets really upset, starts screaming, basically says fuck you to me. She may have actually said fuck you. I can't remember how the interaction went exactly because I was frozen in confusion by how quickly she transitioned from friendly, then to crying and scared, and to now screaming in my face a slew of hateful, angry things. I turned around to start walking to the library and called my friend so that I would have someone aware if this lady tried anything more than just screaming. I get to the library vestibule and watch her through the glass doors. She is standing at the parking lot. Then a car pulls up with a man in it and is obviously upset with the woman. They're arguing, but I can't hear them from inside the vestibule. Eventually she gets in the car and leaves with him. The next day I was dreading class because I didn't know what this woman's attitude would be that day. But she wasn't there the next day. In the end, she never came back to class. I didn't know her name or at the time how to look at a class roster. But looking back, I'm fairly certain she was not enrolled at the school at all, and for whatever reason she was trying to get me to leave with her. I wish I knew her intentions, but at the same time, I'm glad I never had to find out. I'm an 18-year-old male. Moved from my hometown in with my mom about a year ago, now into a farmhouse pretty much in the middle of nowhere on the east side of Australia. It was at the very end of a 7-kilometer long driveway that had like 2 other houses on it, both with elderly couples in them, and a 30-minute drive from the nearest town, which is very small, only having about 1,000 people living there. I'd feel really uncomfortable some nights when I was outside having a cigarette, the old feel like you're being watched, and occasionally would wake up and hear footsteps outside that I was sure did not sound like the sheep and rams that were right near our place. I have a history of drug abuse, and am quite a paranoid person because of it, so I tried to rationalize it all by telling myself I was just being paranoid. One night, I woke up at 3 a.m. and needed to take a piss, when I looked out my bedroom window and very briefly saw a flash of light like it had come off a torch or a phone. Seeing as though we lived in the middle of nowhere, this freaked me out a lot, and I stayed up until morning listening and looking out, but heard nothing. Maybe a week later, my stepdad's ride-on lawnmower has its tires slashed, which my stepdad blamed on me, but I didn't care because it just further enforced the idea that there was somebody lurking around our property. My mom knows I wouldn't do something like that, and instead thought that the neighbor had done it. I always chatted with the neighbor when I went for walks, and I liked him, and really doubted he would have done it, let alone be able to walk that far as he was quite old, and if he came in a vehicle late at night, we would have heard it. Stepdad ended up moving out because, and I don't mean to get too personal, he's a drinker and I witnessed him on the verge of being violent with my mom, and intervened and messed him up a little bit. So he moved out the next day and we haven't seen him since, thankfully. And no, the things that happened after he was gone were 100% not him. It wasn't even considered to us that it could be him because it just wasn't, trust me. With him gone and it only being my mom and 3-year-old sister there, and considering we can't legally own a gun in Australia, and the cops would take a good hour to get out to us if we needed them, I got increasingly paranoid about the things that had been going on because I felt I had to be protective. Some nights I would stay up very late and before going to sleep would turn off all the lights and walk around silently looking out the windows for any signs. And sure enough, on a few occasions I would see torches way off in the distance in the middle of the cow paddocks, as if somebody saw all the lights turn off and started making their way over at 3 a.m., which is weird to say in the least, considering that in every direction other than towards the other houses on our road, there was absolutely nothing but bush and paddocks for a good 20 kilometers. I should add that our front door didn't properly lock and could easily be opened by just messing with the handle a bit, so I started putting a wheelbarrow up against the door and a metal sheet behind the wheelbarrow, so if the door opened it would make a very loud noise that would definitely wake me up. A few weeks went by and I saw and heard absolutely nothing, so I began to get much less paranoid and was thinking about it a lot less. One night, I had gotten back from the pub and was a bit drunk still on my phone in the lounge room. All the lights were off because Mom and Sis were asleep, and I was just laying there, texting whoever and listening to music. We have 2 cats, and on this night, they were frisky and running around wildly, so when I heard the metal sheet I had in front of the door slam on the ground, I figured it was just the cats and ignored it and walked straight past it to my room, maybe half an hour later, not even giving it a glance. The next morning, my paranoia immediately came back in full swing, and I proceeded to freak out when I see that not only had the sheet fallen over, the door itself was ajar and wheelbarrow had moved a good 6 inches as well, which there's no way in hell either of my cats could have done. The only explanation I have for this is that somebody tried to let themselves in, heard the bang and ran off. A few nights after this, my mom woke up late, maybe 4 a.m., to ask me to come out to her car with her because all of her car lights were on and she didn't want to go out by herself. We went out and turned it all off and brought the keys, which we usually just leave in the car, back inside with us. The car battery was dead and we had to get our neighbor to come down with jumper cables the next day. She was certain she didn't leave any of the lights on, and all the doors were shut, meaning somebody went inside, pressed the button on the roof, put the key in the ignition on accessory, and exited and closed the door, with what we think was the intention of draining the battery. She began agreeing with me that somebody was lurking around the house and told me a few things she had noticed that she just didn't want to tell me because I was already anxious about it all and she didn't want to make it worse. Like when the tank water started tasting funny and she found a dead, half-decomposed possum on the grate on top of the tank. She didn't mention how she couldn't possibly see how it could have ended up there unless it happened to die right there on the exact spot, and somehow didn't start making the water taste funny until it was so decomposed you could see its bones, and how a garden rock was moved in a weird position right outside her window as if somebody was using it to stand on to look inside. The house closest to the road had multiple dogs, and the one that I was friendly with, who lived closer, maybe 3 kilometers from us, had a gun and often shot rabbits and foxes, so that definitely makes us the easiest target. All of this made both of us very concerned, and we ended up finding a house and moving about a month later. I know, this is anticlimactic, but it still freaks me out, as I can't think of any other explanation other than that there was somebody lurking around our house for multiple months. There were many times where nobody was home all day, so if they wanted to steal from us, they easily could have come in and take all our stuff, but nothing was ever missing. Might just be overthinking it, but I truly think they had some very sinister intentions and were intentionally just messing with us.
I've always had a weak heart, not just physically. I've always been afraid of my own shadow. It was unsurprising when the doctors told me my heart murmur wasn't just a heart murmur. A year of tests, a year of therapy, constant trips to the hospital, and I was finally told that it had all been for nothing. My poor weak heart wouldn't last till Christmas. It's a strange thing being told that you're dying. I didn't come to terms with it at first. I drank and spent my money. I did reckless, stupid things because I was so damn scared. Then I got the news that a young woman called Laura had been declared brain dead and that I, the lucky chosen one, would be getting a brand new heart a week later. I drove to the hospital slowly, carefully, and readied myself for the ordeal that was to come. As I was lying in bed on the last night, The thought of Laura swirled around in my head, and it wouldn't leave me alone. It was like her name was in flashing lights every time I closed my eyes. It was wrong, I know it was, but I had to see the woman who was giving me her heart. It didn't feel right not to put a face to the one who was saving my life. I knew her name. I knew what ward she was staying on. I'd overheard the two nurses discussing it. I wandered down the meandering hallways until I found what I was looking for, taking my time, making sure I didn't miss any name. I guess I had time on my hands now. In the second to last room, she lay in bed. A woman sat on the bed next to her, holding her hand. My own weak heart stuttered. "Excuse me." I had no idea what to say to her. "I'm Jenna. I'm the person. I'm having surgery tomorrow," and what I assumed was Laura's mother stood up, and I could tell from the look in her eye that she knew who I was. "Thank you for visiting. I know it's strange, but a part of her is going to be living on in you. I wanted to meet you." I stood there, helpless and lost for words. Laura's mother beckoned me over. "Please," she said, "don't feel uncomfortable." It's what she would have wanted. I sat on a chair next to Laura. "How did she..." I broke off. It was too awful to ask. Laura's mother gave me a thin smile. She was a care worker, looked after battered wives, abused women. Last month she met a guy and, well, I suppose years of training can't help you when you're in love. She ignored the warning signs and he killed her. She dedicated her life to those who needed her. Laura's mother looked down. I don't know why I did it, but I reached over and held Laura's hand. I squeezed it. "I'm so sorry. I had a boyfriend once who... He was like that too. Someone like Laura convinced me to leave." Laura's mother gave me another half smile. I could see the tears in her eyes. Then Laura squeezed my hand tightly. She gripped me so hard that her fingernails dug into my skin. I recoiled, a look of horror on my face. Laura's mother looked at me calmly. She squeezes my hand sometimes as well. I think the doctors call it muscle spasm. Either way, there's none of Laura left in there anymore. I looked at the small crescent wounds that had just started to bleed on the palm of my hand. The surgery went perfectly. I was wheeled to the recovery suite after it was over and done with. The raised wound on my chest covered by gauze. It was better if I didn't see it, I thought. I didn't need any more heart issues. I spent the first day doped up on the pain medication, eating only a little and sitting up maybe 2 times. It was a long process, they reassured me. Laura's mother came to visit me the day before I was due to leave. Her calm demeanour hadn't wavered, but I could see that she was suffering. She looked 10 years older and her hand shook when she gave me a hug. "When are you going home?" "Tomorrow," I told her. "Please come visit whenever you want." I started to jot down my address for her, when out of the corner of my eye a flash of blonde disappeared through the doorway. The same brilliant blonde as Laura's hair. "Ow!" I cried out suddenly. It felt like someone had sharply squeezed my hand so hard it had almost crushed the bones. Laura's mother rushed to my side, a look of concern in her eyes. "What's wrong? Is it your heart?" She stumbled over the last words, coming to terms with what she had said. I tried to reassure her and said I'd let the doctors know, and she left with a look of worry on her face. When I looked down, a new set of crescent fingernail marks were below the ones that Laura had made. 10 identical bleeding smiles. The taxi ride home was short, and before I knew it, I was back in my own flat. It felt strange to try and slot back into where I'd left off. My life had been almost over the last time I'd been here. I looked over the mess and the cardboard boxes, the remnants of one night where I had tearfully tried to pack and store my belongings so my parents wouldn't have to do it when I died. Laura's heart beat so strongly it felt like it would come out of my chest. I did this all the time and realised that this was a healthy heart. I did this all the time and I realised that this is what a healthy heart must feel like. So why couldn't I shake my feeling of unease? That night I had a dream. Laura was in her hospital bed, but her mother was gone. I could hear my heart, Laura's heart, beating in my eardrum so loudly it was painful. I tried to cover them, but my hands were pinned to my sides. Some unexplainable force was moving me towards the motionless figure of Laura on the bed, Her lips were blue and the window had come open, whipping her blonde hair around her face. I was almost on top of her when her eyes flew open. They were milky white, the eyes of someone dead. "Get out," she rasped, her voice guttural. I could hear the heart beat faster and faster, drumming until I thought I couldn't take it anymore. Then I woke up. The sound had been real. Laura's heart was so loud it felt like it would rupture my eardrums, and I screamed in agony, trying to cover my ears. It was useless. It was coming from some deep place inside me. I could feel it reverberating around the hollows of my chest. I stumbled out of bed, gasping for air, and tried to find my phone. I needed to call someone, anyone, an ambulance or my mum, anyone that would pick up. "Get out." It was a faint whisper over the hammering thumps of Laura's heart. A low, guttural voice that sounded like it had been made by an animal. And I crawled to the door down the hallway, choking on my screams for help. My neighbour opened the door, his eyes as wide as saucers, at the sight of me on the floor clutching my chest. He drove me to the hospital as I cried in the passenger seat of his car. After about 50 different checkups, the doctors told me that absolutely nothing was wrong with me. They told me my heart was regular, my blood pressure was normal, and that everything was going just swimmingly. I stood in the waiting area, wallowing in my shame and frustration. That heart didn't belong to me. My phone buzzed on the counter, an unknown number. Great. That was all I needed. More unexplained scary things like a stranger on the end of the phone. My voice sounded small on the line. "Hello? Good morning, this is Thames Valley Police. We've called to report an incident that occurred in your flat at around 1:30 AM today." I felt a wave of embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, I recently had surgery and I wasn't feeling well. I had my neighbour drive me to the hospital, and I think I panicked a little in the hallway before I left." There was a small silence on the other end of the phone. "I'm afraid this is something you might want to be sitting down for." I felt Laura's heart beat strong and calm. There was an incident of forced entry by Mr. Samuel Matthews. According to our police reports, he's your ex-partner and you filed a restraining order against him in September 2017. My blood ran cold. "I did. He's in police custody. We found an automatic weapon on him, and we believe he had the intent to harm you. You have an officer currently stationed at your flat who can fill you in depending on how long your hospital stay will be." I thanked him and hung up the phone. For a moment, I leaned against the wall, the horror slowly spreading over me. If I had been in my flat 10 minutes later, he would have found me. Laura's heartbeats filled my ears again, but now they were gentle, calming. Her mother said she dedicated every part to helping those who needed it. I put both my hands on my chest, overwhelmed by my own gratitude, and listened to Laura. Number 3. I am infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level, far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her, don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contacts list before the inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. But it was excruciating and exhausting, almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with someone was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I can never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself, almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sexually active together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make or break era of a blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start slowly drifting apart. The latter of which I don't think I'll be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivates me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed. How she'd caress the pendant on her necklace when she was frightened. How'd she twirl her hair and her finger when she was excited? All of it. Her smell, her smile, her eyes. Yeah, I know. I'll probably make you sick reading about it. I'd feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I'd think about doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates, to that first kiss, as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time, I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. Alright, fine, I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet, I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here writing this at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We never actually spent a night together, no matter how late she was over. Once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger, just as a casual kiss goodnight, a smile and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it, but after almost 8 weeks of dating, it became strange. I'd ask her about it. I took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked her and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk was coming eventually, she started. She took a deep breath with a long drawn-out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called somnichology. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanour seemed to say, that's it. No, Stephen, listen, she said. She wasn't laughing. It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things. She was starting to raise her voice, breathe heavily, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night, and I told her she was probably exaggerating. Well, I was wrong. That night she stayed at my house, but she warned me of something before falling asleep. Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disorientated if that happens. And don't respond to me, just ignore it. I nodded and agreed. If it becomes too much, she continued, just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind. I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave to the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours had passed, but I woke up in the dark with the sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered. She was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled. But then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up in the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out, I admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. I'll chew the skin from your bones, she said. I froze. At first I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I had expected. I thought it'd be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed, just randomly swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her, but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking. Maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted. Something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again in the same voice as before. If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by the morning. That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. But I wasn't going to be able to fall back asleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, going to see the first few hints of the sun rising, and then I thought I heard something from the bedroom. I listened. And then I heard it again. Stephen. It was the same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first, but then it continued. Stephen. Still, I said nothing. I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom? The voice barely sounded human. Or maybe you'd prefer if I come to you. I still didn't say anything. I was told not to, but I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard her once more. Sorry if this spoils your plans, she began laughing. The two of you were supposed to walk the trail again, she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd said next. You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city, then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring. She began laughing. And that's when I realised this wasn't just a problem with sleep talking. It was something much, much more. Something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer I'm merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into that bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple more hours yet. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice. Still, the same low-pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch writing this, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. More so, I believe, than the typical falling in love story. No, I fear that the infatuation I felt was this entity slowly taking control of me, of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur, and she would be free of it. I know I should leave, that I should open the front door, get in my car and drive far away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I am infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated.
This happened last year, and it still gives me the creeps thinking about it. I was leaving work and was on my way to a friend's house. My work is on the literal edge of town. It's pretty rural and gets really dead at night. My friends live even further away from my work, in where I guess you'd consider to be the country area, and the roads get more and more desolate the closer you get to their house. I clocked out of work, went to my car and called my friend to talk to her on the phone about something, while I drove to her and her boyfriend's house. I looked both ways before I exited the parking lot, but there was absolutely nobody else on the road that I could see, which was a pretty good distance. I made it a mile or so down the road when I see headlights behind me and coming up fast. It was a full-sized pickup truck that had been lifted, and he got so close to my car that all I could see out of my back window was the Chevy badge on his grill. I thought he wanted to pass me, so I waved out the window for him to pass using the suicide lane, since the road was only 2 lanes there. Instead, he started laying on his horn. Mind you, I'm not a slowpoke driver. I was already doing 55 in a 45, so it's not like I was inconveniencing him with my speed. I tell my friend what's happening, and she tells me to just keep going and that he'll probably leave me alone eventually. He stays glued behind me for another mile or so, occasionally honking some more. Eventually, he started turning his brights on for a few seconds, and then he started slowing down until we were a couple 100 feet apart. And then he'd floor it to fly up behind me really fast like he was feigning to rear end me. I'm getting more sketched out at this point, and my friend is trying to calm me down and telling me to just keep driving. At this point, I'm really scared that he's going to hit me, and I wanted to get away, but there was no businesses open that late this far out of the city. In fact, there wasn't really any places to be open anymore, just fields and some houses every now and then. I decided to floor it and to try to outrun him, figuring my Corolla might not be Formula 1 car, but surely it's a hell of a lot quicker than an old pickup truck, and I could get some distance. I got up to 85 and kept an eye on him, and he didn't seem to be trying to catch up. I felt a little safer and assumed he'd given up, so I dropped back down to like 60 and informed my friend that it worked and he was done. I still had tunnel vision from the adrenaline, and I didn't realize he was flying up behind me again until he was barreling towards me, probably doing 85 or 90. I realized he wasn't slowing down, so I braced myself for the impact and told my friend he was about to rear-end me. Instead, he cut around me, missing my car by inches, and flew around in front of me. He cut right in front of my car and slammed on his brakes, trying to get me to rear-end him instead. I was able to stop in time, and he started slowly continuing forward. He repeatedly stopped in the road for a few miles, almost like he was baiting me to pass. My friend told me that her boyfriend was on the phone with the police and was keeping them updated, and for me to stay on the phone with her as long as I could. After a while, I could see my friend's street sign, and she kept assuring me that her and her boyfriend were outside waiting for me to pull in, and that the cops were on the way. She told me to pull into the driveway and stay in the car until they were sure he was gone. He made what should have been a 10-second drive to the street a painstaking process because he kept stopping in front of me. The next part was really my fault. I instinctively turned on my blinker, which let him know I was about to turn onto the road, so he immediately whipped up the curb to cut in front of me again. My friend's house is on a corner, so her and her boyfriend were able to see everything now, but I had a bit of ways to go before I got into her driveway. The truck stayed put in the middle of the road this time, and he wasn't moving, so I tried to go around him. As soon as I started to pass him, he floored it and cut to the left, nearly hitting my front end and blocking the road completely. I was feeling braver now that I knew help was on the way, and my friends were there, so I laid on my horn, yelled some choice words, and told him to move his ass. My friend and her boyfriend had gotten to the edge of the property where we were by then, and I guess the driver took notice of them and slowly started moving out of my way. I pulled into her driveway as fast as I could and looked out the rearview mirror to see him slowly driving up to her driveway where he stopped. I couldn't see his facial features because it was so dark and he was kind of far away, but I could tell he was staring at me the whole time. My friends had gotten to my car just as he got to the driveway, and I watched my friend approach the truck. I heard her say, "You need to leave now. The cops are on their way." And they stared at each other for a few seconds before he slowly continued on. Her neighborhood is a giant loop, and he never exited, so we felt adventurous and sneaked around the block in search of where he went while we waited on the cops. We found the truck parked at a house and returned just as the police arrived. We told the cops where the truck was, and the officer returned informing us that there was no answer at the door and he left. Her boyfriend, who had lived there forever, nor his mother recognized the truck or the man, and if I recall, his mother even knew the people who lived at the house the truck parked at. And as far as I'm aware, he wasn't seen again. Because I'm a very small female who was alone at almost midnight, we all assume he watched me leave work and was trying to bully me into wrecking my car so I would pull over and he could abduct me. We think once he realized the cops were involved, he parked the truck in someone's otherwise empty driveway and likely left it there to hide in a nearby field until the cops left the area. This all started when I decided to sleep over at my boyfriend's house last night. The night had gone normal. We went to bed early and nothing out of the ordinary seemed to happen. For some reason, though, I kept waking up randomly in the middle of the night, and my boyfriend didn't seem to sleep much at all. He said he just felt distressed. Anyway, I remember I woke up sometime late in the night. I was instantly filled with a feeling of discomfort, as though something bad was close. Just outside his window, I heard flutes. There were maybe 3 or 4 of them, and they were all playing some weird and ominous song. I sat up quickly and was going to look out the window, but something stopped me. I was just too scared of what I might see. After a few minutes, I managed to look. Right behind my boyfriend's house, there's a small forest by a park. It is fairly dense, but that entire area is just sort of creepy, especially since there's hardly anyone ever at the park. The flutes continued for a little while, and I jumped when I felt my boyfriend grab me and pull me down beside him. He hugged me instantly, and the flute stopped right away. He made a few sounds of discomfort, something he usually does when he is scared or distressed. I could only stare through the darkness, trying to figure out what had happened. When I checked the time on my phone, it was around 2:30 in the morning. The next morning, I told my boyfriend and we talked about what had happened. I'm a guy who's pretty skeptical about things, so I tried to find a logical explanation, but I couldn't think of anything. I had never heard that sort of sound before in my life. My boyfriend told me that when he woke up and grabbed me, he felt really distressed, as I had thought, but he said he didn't know why. He said when he saw me looking out the window, his first instinct was to get me away from it and stop me from looking out of it. He said he never heard the flutes and he seemed freaked out when I told him. Now, my boyfriend has had quite a few paranormal experiences, but none that had involved me like this before. He has indigenous background, so I thought it might be something similar to that, especially since he thought he had seen what might have been a Wendigo sometime in the summer. Does anyone have any idea what this might have been? It has left me feeling really strange, and I'm not quite sure what it all means. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of things happening may not totally make much sense. This happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I assume it was really late because there weren't many cars on the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open and someone violently grabbed me by my arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that grabbed me looked me in the eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out at the last second and save me. I looked at the house as long as I could as the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and in fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a shitty neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like hell, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't know how the kidnapper fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette guy was punching and kicking the kidnapper in his head and face. The kidnapper was out cold. Cigarette guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling downstairs. He bled everywhere. I still have no idea how Cigarette Guy knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes, maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. Cigarette Guy starts pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up. He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. I wasn't as scared of Cigarette Guy as much as the bearded guy, but I was still in fear of him. He started to ask me questions with an attitude. Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on it, despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough and figured out where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him, and made me promise that I wouldn't even tell the police anything. Like I said, he had an attitude. I didn't care what he asked me, I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still laying on the ground, bleeding at the bottom of the stairs that cigarette guy threw him down. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead, and I hope now that he was. Cigarette guy stepped over the bearded guy, and I followed. We walked outside, and cigarette guy looked around panicky. I remember him telling me, "The police don't like me." We walked out of the projects, and my feet still hurt. Cigarette guy was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms. He walked down the road for a moment. Then I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move, and I was scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me before I could even get remotely close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assume now that the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road when I saw my mom and her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. Cigarette guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited, the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away. I ran towards the police and my mom. My mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember too much about their questions, but I remember my mom telling the police some convoluted story that just didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and I didn't say much but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up and had time to think about that day, I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened from what I explained to him years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped. Someone saved me, but the person that saved me had warrants and wasn't mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat up a guy half to death. If he would have gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the man helped me because while it was all happening, I didn't even notice he was helping me. To the man that saved me, thank you. To the man that tried to kidnap me, let's not meet. This happened back in 2004 in northern Wisconsin. I was 16 at the time and was out deer hunting with my dad and a friend of his, Frank. I remember this day like it was yesterday. The dialogue isn't word for word, but the idea of it is 100% accurate. As a side note, it was one day after 8 people were shot less than 2 hours away. My dad and I had a few different stands over an area of maybe 3/4 square mile. He had been hunting there for at least 10 years, and I had been going with him since I was 5. Up until I was 12, legal age to hunt with a rifle, I had just been tagging along. This particular morning, we walked to my stand first. It was about 5 a.m., so still dark outside. I got situated, and my dad and Frank went off to our other 2 stands over a ridge, maybe another 500 to 600 yards off. Sitting there in the dark is always a little eerie. Not long after my dad and Frank left, I see a flashlight from the general direction of which they headed, maybe 200 yards away, roughly moving my direction. I figured they forgot something from the truck or something, so I radioed to see what they were doing. We're sitting in my stand. Frank is about to head to the other one, he says. Obviously, this flashlight is someone else. This isn't super uncommon and isn't really a big deal. Those woods get crowded sometimes and there's a spot to park in that general direction. I turn on my light so the other hunter can see that there is someone there. He stops. I see the light turn and go a different direction. No big deal. I end up dozing off while it's still dark out. When I wake up, the sun is up. It's around 8 a.m. I sit there for a bit, radio my dad to see if he has seen anything moving. Nothing yet. A couple gunshots off in the distance is all. I get up and go for a slow little walk to get my blood moving a bit. Not far, maybe 30 yards out and back, trying not to make a sound. I come back to my stand, sit down and take a real good look around. Nothing really going on. I finally look out to my left, where I had seen the flashlight before, and see orange. For anyone unfamiliar, hunters have to wear blaze orange during gun season. I radio my dad and Frank to see if either one of them were moving around. Dad says no. I hear nothing from Frank. I grab the binoculars out of my backpack to see if it's Frank. It's definitely not. This guy is looking at me through a scope, rifle aimed directly at me. This is a huge no-no. Massive rule we all learn in hunter's education: never point your rifle at something you don't intend to shoot. Dumb people still do it though. It's few and far between, but it happens. This is why normal people use binoculars. My first thought, what a fucking dickbag. Thing is, even with me looking at him, he doesn't put his gun down. Now I'm starting to panic, thinking I'm going to be the next hunting murder victim. I slowly grab my rifle, get up, staying behind as many trees as I can, and walk down a little path to the side of my stand. My stand was on this kind of little knoll on the side of a much larger hill. Radio my dad, tell him what's up. He tells me to sit tight and stay out of sight. Obviously, as a 16-year-old, I couldn't do that and had to keep looking. Every time I looked, the guy was still aiming in my direction, but was always standing in a different spot. Like I would look, go back to hiding, look again, and he would be 30 yards from where he was the last time. About 10 minutes of this goes by when my dad radios me. "How you doing, bud?" Looking back, he was very obviously trying to keep calm. At the time, I thought he just wasn't taking me seriously. He's still there, but he keeps moving. I don't know what his problem is. Dad told me to just keep hiding and he'll figure it out, that I'll be coming up near him in a minute or two. That's when I hear the shot. I lost my shit trying to get a hold of my dad. Did he just get shot? Where the fuck is he? Did he have to shoot the guy? What the fuck is going on? I sit there for maybe 2 to 3 minutes that felt like hours. "Alright, come on out and head toward my stand," Dad says. I peek up over the little knoll I was behind and see my dad waving from along the ridge the random guy had been on. I make the trek on over to him to see what happened. Turns out, Frank was feeling a little restless and took a little stroll and ended up on the other side of the particular ridge the stranger was on, not knowing he was there. He had knocked his radio battery loose while he was getting situated earlier in the morning and had no idea anything was even going on. The shot I heard was actually Frank shooting a deer. Dad said as soon as Frank shot, the guy walked off away from us toward the logging road. We helped Frank out with his deer and decided to call it an early day. Although I was extremely nervous, the rest of the week went on with no incidents.